What would you do if you came home one afternoon and found your fence torn to pieces, your land ripped open by bulldozers, and an HOA president standing on your property claiming she now owned the right to build through it? That is exactly what happened to me. My name is Elias Mercer, and I thought moving to rural Colorado would finally give me peace. A quiet ranch, clear land, boundaries, and distance from the corruption I had spent years prosecuting as a former state fraud attorney. But everything changed the day Karen Voss, the president of Ridgeline Crest HOA, bulldozed through my eastern pasture and destroyed the cedar fence my late father and I built by hand. She claimed it was for an emergency access expansion route. What she did not know was that I understood fraud better than she understood power. What looked like a simple property dispute quickly unraveled into something far darker. I discovered that Karen and her HOA board had forged county plats, falsified easement maps, and illegally altered land records to steal access through my ranch after their subdivision's only lawful entrance collapsed from a hidden culvert failure. Worse, they had concealed that infrastructure failure from 214 homeowners while secretly draining HOA reserve funds into shell companies tied to Karen's own family. Using time-stamped surveillance footage, drone mapping, forensic land surveys, FOIA records, and internal HOA ledgers leaked by terrified residents, I uncovered a conspiracy involving bribed county officials, fake violation notices, illegal trespassing after midnight, fraudulent fines against homeowners, and over $1 million in misused community funds. But the turning point came when I found the truth buried in an old deed appendix. The land beneath Ridgeline Crest's only legal entrance belonged to me. And under Colorado law, because Karen had violated the easement conditions by trespassing on my land, I had the right to suspend access. So I did the unthinkable. With a court order in hand, I built a fully legal concrete boundary wall across the only lawful entrance to the entire subdivision. Overnight, Karen's kingdom collapsed. Residents who had once believed her lies turned against her as the truth surfaced. She had used their dues to fund land theft. She had threatened foreclosures to cover reserve shortages. She had secretly bought adjacent property through a shell company planning to profit millions once the HOA lost its original road. The scandal exploded into court. One by one, her allies broke. Her treasurer turned witness. Her vice president accepted immunity. A county planner confessed to bribery. And eventually, even a sitting county commissioner was exposed in the corruption chain. In a packed courtroom, forged plats were dismantled under oath. Financial trails revealed phantom invoices, hidden kickbacks, and illegal wire transfers. The judge dissolved the entire HOA board, froze its assets, voided all fraudulent fines, and ordered criminal conspiracy referrals. Karen Voss was let out in handcuffs. But this story is not just about revenge. It is about what happened after the wall. Because once the corrupt board fell, the real question began. Could a broken community rebuild itself? Could neighbors divided by fear, fraud, and betrayal become a real neighborhood again? And what did I choose to do with the wall that had brought an entire HOA to its knees? In the full story ahead, you will witness every hidden camera, recording every courtroom revelation, every forged document, every betrayal, and every emotional reckoning that turned one destroyed fence into the collapse of an entire corrupt empire. Stay with me, because the most powerful twist in this story is not how Karen lost everything. It is what the neighborhood became after the truth finally came to light. The first thing I saw when I turned off County Road 18 and onto my gravel lane was dust. Not the ordinary Colorado dust that hangs low over dry pasture in late August. This was heavier, freshly churned, thick enough to blur the cottonwoods lining the western edge of my property. Then I saw the splintered cedar posts. My fence handset by me and my father, 12 years earlier, lay smashed across the ditch like snapped bones. For a moment, I just sat behind the wheel of my truck engine, idling one hand still on the key. The late afternoon sun struck the broken wire strands and made them glint like cut veins. Beyond the ruined fence line, a yellow excavator was digging into my pasture. A man in an HOA contractor vest waved another machine forward, as if he owned the land beneath him. He did not. That strip of pasture 40 feet wide and running along the east boundary of my acreage, outside Ridgeline Crest Estates, was deeded in my name clear title, recorded with the county in Mesa County, Colorado, 17 years before that subdivision ever existed. And yet, there they were, cutting straight through it, building a road. I killed the engine and stepped out slowly. The wind smelled of diesel fuel and broken earth. A woman in a pale blue blazer stood near a white SUV marked with the Ridgeline Crest HOA seal. Blonde hair fixed in place like sprayed plastic. Clipboard in hand, chin raised. Karen Voss, president of the Ridgeline Crest HOA. She smiled when she saw me walking toward her, the kind of smile people use when they believe paperwork makes them untouchable. "Mr. Mercer," she called, "you're interfering with authorized development." I stopped 10 feet from her and looked past her shoulder at the trench now carved into my pasture. "You tore down my fence." Karen glanced at the wreckage without concern. That fence was obstructing an approved emergency access expansion route. "This is private land." She lifted the clipboard and tapped a stapled map attached to it. According to revised subdivision plat records, this corridor is now designated a shared ingress easement. There are moments in life when anger arrives hot. This was not one of them. What I felt instead was colder, measured. Because I had seen this tactic before. Years ago, before I left Denver and came west, I had spent 11 years as an assistant state prosecutor handling fraud and land corruption cases. Developers are laundering false plots through cooperative boards. Municipal bribery hidden behind forged survey amendments. Quiet theft dressed in legal formatting. Karen had chosen the wrong pasture. I held out my hand. "Let me see the plat." She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. Still, she handed me the document. At first glance, it looked legitimate county formatting parcel overlays and assessor stamp markings. But the filing code, in the lower right corner, was wrong. The suffix belonged to drainage amendments, not easement reassignments. Someone had altered an old county plat and refiled it as boundary authority. Sloppy work, illegal work. I folded the paper carefully and handed it back. "You've got 1 hour to remove every machine from my property." Karen's expression hardened. Failure to comply with HOA infrastructure orders may subject adjacent landowners to obstruction penalties. I almost laughed. Instead, I pulled out my phone and took time-stamped photographs of every machine, every broken fence post, and every contractor badge number visible in the field. Then I photographed Karen holding the forged plat. She turned away too late. "You can't record this without board consent," she snapped. "This is open land, Ms. Voss," I said, "and trespass." By dusk, I had called the sheriff. Deputy Elkins arrived just after sunset boots, crunching over torn cedar fragments while contractors pretended not to hear him. Karen handed him her false paperwork with theatrical confidence. He studied both sides, then looked at me. I handed him a certified copy of my deed from the fireproof tube I kept behind my truck seat. Original parcel survey attached. He compared coordinates. Silence stretched across the pasture. Finally, he lowered the papers and said flatly, "These machines need to shut down now." Karen's face drained of color. "This subdivision has county approval. Then produce the recorded easement order," Elkins said. She couldn't, because there wasn't one. The excavators powered down one by one under the falling dark, their engines coughing into silence like reluctant confessions. But the damage had already been done. Nearly 80 feet of fence destroyed, drainage slope altered, topsoil ripped open. And something else bothered me more than the fence. Why would the HOA risk this? No board gambles on blatant land trespass unless the stakes are larger than access convenience. That answer came the next morning. At 6:12 a.m., I launched my survey drone over the eastern ridge and mapped the excavation scar from above. The aerial view revealed what ground level had hidden the new road trench aligned directly with the gated stone entrance of Ridgeline Crest Estates. Their existing paved entrance road on the north side had been red-tagged and barricaded. Collapsed culvert, county closure order. Meaning Karen's board had lost its legal entrance. And they had tried to seize mine. I spent that afternoon in the Mesa County Records office. FOIA request forms, parcel overlays, emergency access filings, subdivision amendments. By 3 o'clock, I found the first crack. Ridgeline Crest's original 2009 development filing listed exactly one permanent ingress easement to county highway access. 1. And that easement buried in Appendix C, page 47 ran across a narrow strip of land now legally owned by me. Because I had purchased the adjacent Whitaker Ranch acreage 6 years earlier, and with it inherited the deeded corridor, no one on that HOA board had apparently bothered to examine. They had no alternate lawful entrance. None. Without my land, their gated subdivision had no compliant permanent access route under county code. That explained the panic. That explained the forged plat. And that explained why when I returned home near sunset, I found a bright orange violation notice nailed to my barn door. Notice of noncompliance. Unauthorized perimeter fencing obstructing community access. Fine $8,500. Unsigned. No board seal. Fake. I removed it carefully, slid it into an evidence sleeve, and photographed both sides under timestamp lighting. Then I checked my perimeter cameras. At 1:13 p.m., Karen herself had walked onto my property with 2 board members and posted it. Trespass again. By nightfall, I had opened a new evidence ledger on my office desk. Photographs cataloged, drone files archived, sheriff incident report copied, forgery notes cross-referenced. And under a yellow desk lamp with the Colorado wind rattling the porch screen outside, I began drafting the first legal document that would bring Ridgeline Crest to its knees, petition for emergency injunctive relief. Because if Karen Voss wanted a land war, she had just handed one to a man who used to build felony fraud cases for a living. And this time, I wasn't prosecuting for the state. This time, it was personal. By sunrise the next morning, my pasture looked less like home and more like the opening frame of a land war. Thin white fog clung low over the torn earth where the excavators had cut into my eastern boundary, wrapping the shattered cedar fence posts in a ghostly haze. The broken wire still sagged into the trench like veins exposed after surgery. I stood beside the damage, with a legal pad in one hand and coffee gone cold in the other, waiting for the survey crew I had hired before dawn. In Colorado, people win land disputes on inches. Emotion means nothing. Anger means less. Coordinates decide truth. At 6:47 a.m., the truck from High Mesa Surveying rolled through my ranch gate. Out stepped Elena Ruiz, a licensed independent surveyor I had worked with once years earlier on a corruption case involving forged mineral easements near Durango. Elena was exacting unsentimental and impossible to intimidate qualities I respected deeply. She studied the trench in silence, then crouched beside one of the uprooted posts. "They didn't just cross your line," she said. "They cut nearly 12 feet inside your deeded parcel. 12. She nodded once, deliberate. This wasn't measurement drift. That mattered. Mistakes create civil disputes. Deliberate encroachment creates liability. By 7:30, her crew had deployed GPS tripods across the pasture, laser markers blinking red in the pale light. I filmed every step, time-stamped footage, spoken parcel references, and visible coordinates. Chain of custody mattered now. If this reached court, and I knew it would, the cleaner the record, the sharper the blade. At 8:12 a.m., Elena called me over to her truck monitor. A layered parcel map glowed across the screen. Blue line, my legal boundary. Red line, HOA excavation route. Yellow overlay, Ridgeline Crest's revised plat filed 3 months earlier. The red line crossed blue cleanly and illegally. But what caught my eye was the yellow overlay. It had been fabricated from an older subdivision drainage map, then relabeled as an ingress easement amendment, exactly what I suspected when Karen handed me the forged document. Elena zoomed into the filing metadata. The county seal image was authentic. The filing number was cloned, but the recorder timestamp font was wrong. Someone had digitally altered the plat before submission. Forgery. Not clerical error. Not misunderstanding. Forgery. I felt the old prosecutor's reflex click into place inside me, the cold analytical rhythm I had once lived in every day. Pattern, motive, chain. "Can you certify this?" I asked. Elena gave me a look over the rim of her glasses. "I already am." By noon, I had her preliminary affidavit signed, stamped, and scanned into 3 encrypted backups. Then I drove straight into town. The Mesa County Clerk and Recorder's office occupied an old sandstone building near the courthouse square, cool inside even in the August heat. I filed formal public records requests for every amendment submitted under Ridgeline Crest Estates during the last 18 months, plats, easement changes, board petitions, contractor filings, and engineering reviews. The clerk at records intake knew me from older cases. She lowered her voice when she saw the HOA name. "You're not the first one asking." That stopped me. "Who else?" She checked the screen. 2 homeowners from Ridgeline Crest. Complaints about emergency assessments and unexplained special infrastructure fees. Now the picture widened. Karen wasn't just stealing land. She was financing something. I requested those financial disclosure filings too. When I returned home that afternoon, I found another surprise waiting at my gate. A locked steel chain had been wrapped across my eastern service road. Fresh padlock. HOA notice attached. Private access, restricted, unauthorized obstruction zone under board authority. I photographed it before touching anything. Then I checked the post anchor. They had bolted the chain directly into my own fence columns. Another trespass. Another criminal property interference count. I cut the chain with hydraulic bolt cutters while my body camera recorded every second. At exactly 3:26 p.m., Karen's white SUV rolled up behind me. She stepped out furiously, heels sinking into ranch dust. "You are destroying association property." I held up the severed chain. This was attached to my fence. "That road is under emergency board jurisdiction." "No," I said quietly. "It isn't." For a second, her expression faltered. She knew then that something had shifted. I walked past her without another word. Predators become dangerous when cornered, but they become careless when frightened. That evening, I reviewed perimeter camera footage from the prior night. At 11:42 p.m., 2 HOA board members, Vice President Leon Bixby and Treasurer Marcia Denthad, entered my property with a contractor truck and installed the chain under floodlights. Leon carried the same forged plat copy Karen had shown me. Marcia held a flashlight while he drilled bolts into my cedar posts. Timestamp. Faces visible. License plate readable. I archived the footage to cloud storage and copied it onto 2 physical drives. At 6 that evening, Elena called again. I found something else. She emailed a supplemental overlay comparison. The forged plat amendment had not been submitted through official county channels at all. It had been uploaded through a developer proxy account belonging to Western Range Infrastructure, LLC, a contractor currently under bid with Ridgeline Crest, HOA, for gate expansion and emergency corridor construction. That contractor name rang familiar. I dug deeper. Within an hour, corporate registration records tied Western Range Infrastructure to a shell company in Arizona. That shell company shared a managing agent with Karen Voss's brother-in-law. Kickback structure, related party contracting, hidden self-dealing, and suddenly, the illegal road made financial sense. Ridgeline Crest had lost its legal entrance after the county condemned their northern culvert. Instead of disclosing that failure to residents and paying for lawful redesign, Karen's board had attempted to seize my land, fabricate an easement, and funnel emergency construction money into a connected contractor. Fraud layered over trespass. By nightfall, I had drafted 3 filings. First, amended injunction request for immediate cease and desist on all HOA encroachment activity. Second, a civil trespass damages complaint with evidentiary exhibits. Third, referral packet to county fraud investigators for forged public land records. But before I could print the final fraud, exhibit headlights flashed across my barn wall. I stepped onto the porch. 3 Ridgeline Crest residents stood at my gate. A retired teacher named Helen Pike, a veteran named Curtis Hale, and a young father I recognized only as Miguel from the southern cul-de-sac. Helen spoke first. "We got fined $9,000 this month," she said, voice shaking. "Karen says it's for emergency access stabilization." Curtis handed me an envelope. Inside were photocopies of HOA assessment notices, special infrastructure levy, mandatory legal defense reserve, emergency road acquisition fund, all imposed in the last 60 days. Every line item is tied back to the same illegal land seizure operation, which is now sitting in pieces across my pasture. Miguel looked past me toward the ruined fence. "She told us you refused to cooperate and endangered the neighborhood." I met his eyes. She lied. Silence settled over us under the cooling Colorado dusk. Then Curtis asked the question I had been waiting for. What really happens if they lose access? I looked toward the eastern ridge where the unfinished trench cut across my land like a wound. They lose their only lawful entrance. No one spoke after that. Because they understood what Karen had done. She had gambled their homes, their property values, and their legal standing on forged maps and stolen land. And by dawn tomorrow, when my injunction filing hit district court, that gamble would begin collapsing in public. By the third morning, the story had spread beyond fence lines. In Colorado ranch country, truth travels in strange ways through feed stores, courthouse hallways, diner counters, and the quiet pauses between neighbors refilling propane tanks. By 8 o'clock, half of Mesa Ridge seemed to know that Ridgeline Crest, HOA, had bulldozed private land and been stopped by a former prosecutor with drones deeds and an injunction in motion. What they did not yet know was how much worse it was. I was standing in District Court Annex B when the clerk stamped my emergency injunction packet at 8:14 a.m. Temporary restraining relief request, civil trespass claim, property interference complaint, motion to preserve evidence. Each document carried exhibits attached in sequence, photographs of the destroyed fence, drone imaging of trench encroachment, survey affidavit from Elena Ruiz, forgery analysis of altered plat metadata, perimeter footage of the midnight chain installation. The judge assigned emergency review for same-day consideration. That alone was bad news for Karen. But what truly mattered sat in a sealed envelope inside my leather case, the Whitaker easement transfer deed. That document changed everything. Because while Ridgeline Crest residents believed their Grand Stone Gate entrance belonged to the subdivision, it did not. Legally, the land beneath their only county-compliant entrance corridor still crossed my parcel, and that parcel belonged to me. I had discovered it buried in Appendix C of the original 2009 development filing 2 nights earlier, but before using it, I needed absolute confirmation, which meant one more trip. At 9:30 a.m., Elena Ruiz met me at the North Ridge entrance to Ridgeline Crest. The HOA gate stood open, ornamental iron arch gleaming in sunlight, luxury stonework framing a paved lane that curved elegantly toward manicured homes. To residents, it looked permanent. To me, it now looked like leverage. Elena set up her GPS station just outside the stone columns and began cross-referencing parcel coordinates. 40 minutes later, she handed me the tablet. The digital overlay was unmistakable. The entire entrance, lane roadbed stone, gate pillar security keypad island, and decorative median wall sat atop a 20-foot easement strip tied to my deeded land. Not theirs, mine. And unlike an easement granted in perpetuity, this one had a conditional maintenance clause. A clause Karen's board had already violated. Section 8.4, any obstruction, unauthorized alteration, or material trespass affecting adjacent grantor property voids continuation rights pending judicial review. In plain English, by bulldozing my pasture and forging a new access route, the HOA had triggered breach conditions on their own only legal entrance. I let out a slow breath. Karen had not just committed trespass. She had endangered the legal existence of her entire subdivision access. At 10:17 a.m., my phone rang. Caller ID Ridgeline Crest Legal Counsel. I answered on speaker. Mr. Mercer said, a male voice, polished and strained. This is David Laramie, representing Ridgeline Crest HOA. We'd like to discuss a temporary settlement arrangement. That was fast. Too fast. Define settlement. A mutual access accommodation while title interpretation is reviewed. Translation, they knew. They had discovered the easement defect, and they were panicking. I looked at Elena, who raised one eyebrow, but said nothing. You destroyed my fence, I said into the phone. You forged county plats. Your board trespassed twice. I'm not discussing accommodation until all unauthorized activity ceases. Laramie lowered his tone. If the gate corridor is obstructed, emergency service access to 214 homes may be compromised. That sounds like a board governance problem. He exhaled sharply. Then Karen Voss believes this can still be resolved privately. That almost made me laugh. Karen still thought this was a bluff contest. It was not. By noon, the court granted temporary injunctive relief. No HOA personnel agents or contractors were permitted to enter altar post notices upon or obstruct any part of my parcel pending full hearing. Violation would trigger contempt sanctions. Deputy Elkins himself served the order at Ridgeline Crest Clubhouse at 1:05 p.m. He later told me Karen threw a glass water pitcher across the boardroom. That afternoon, I drove to the subdivision entrance again, this time not as an observer, but as a landowner. I parked beside the stone gate and posted 3 certified notices. Notice of easement breach review. Access rights subject to suspension pending court adjudication. Notice of property claim assertion. Underlying parcel title vested in Elias Mercer deed. Reference MC 44721. Notice of boundary enforcement. Unauthorized use beyond judicial review may constitute continuing trespass. Residents began gathering within minutes. Confused faces behind windshields. Neighbors stepping onto sidewalks with folded notices in hand. Curtis Hale approached first. Is this real? I handed him a certified parcel overlay copy. His jaw tightened as he studied the map. She never told us any of this. No, I said. She didn't. By 3 o'clock, local press arrived. Mesa Ridge Sentinel. Then Channel 8 Regional News from Grand Junction. A camera crew filmed the gate pillars while I gave a measured statement. This is not retaliation. This is legal boundary enforcement after repeated unlawful trespass, forged filings, and misuse of HOA authority. I never raised my voice. I did not need to. Facts are loud enough when documented. At 4:20 p.m., Karen arrived in her white SUV with Leon Bixby and treasurer Marcia Dent. She stepped out already furious. You are terrorizing this neighborhood. I turned toward her slowly. You tried to steal land you do not own. She jabbed a finger toward the gate. You can't shut down an entire residential entrance. Actually, I said under Colorado property law, I can petition suspension of breached easement rights when grant conditions are violated. Her face lost color. Leon muttered something under his breath. Marcia avoided eye contact entirely. Then Karen made her mistake. In front of cameras, in front of residents, in front of 2 deputies, now watching from curbside, she said, you were supposed to sign the acquisition packet and take the compensation. The sentence hung in the air like broken glass. Reporter microphones tilted upward instantly. I stared at her. Acquisition packet, she froze. Too late. She'd admitted there had been an undisclosed land seizure attempt, meaning they had prepared private forced acquisition paperwork before forging the plat. Premeditation, fraudulent intent, publicly confessed. The crowd around the gate erupted, residents shouting questions. Helen Pike is demanding explanations. Miguel holding up his inflated emergency assessment bill. Curtis yelling, you charged us for stolen land. Karen tried to retreat toward her SUV, but reporters closed in. And for the first time since this began, I saw fear in her eyes. Real fear. That night, after the cameras left and the subdivision lights glowed behind those stone pillars like a stranded luxury island, I sat in my office reviewing a newly delivered county engineering report. The condemned north entrance culvert, the one Karen had hidden from residents, had collapsed 6 weeks earlier because the HOA ignored structural repair recommendations while diverting reserve funds into legal redevelopment contingency accounts. They had known the entrance would fail. Instead of fixing it, they tried to steal mine. And now I understood the full shape of their desperation. Ridgeline Crest did not merely need my land. Without lawful access across it, their insurance compliance, fire code certification, mortgage lending status, and municipal occupancy standing were all at risk. Karen had built her entire fraud on one assumption that I would fold quietly. Instead, she had handed me the legal choke point to her kingdom. And by dawn, I intended to use it. That night, I did not sleep. Not because of fear, because patterns were beginning to align. When you have spent years prosecuting fraud, there is a moment in every major case when isolated violations stop looking random and begin forming architecture. A forged plat here, a fake fine there. Trespass notices, related party contractors, misused reserve funds, hidden structural failures. By midnight, Ridgeline Crest was no longer a land dispute. It was beginning to look like organized fraud. And fraud, unlike anger, leaves patterns on camera. At 12:43 a.m., seated in my office above the barn workshop, I began pulling synchronized footage from every perimeter device on my property. I had installed the camera network 3 years earlier after cattle theft incidents spread across neighboring ranches. 12 infrared perimeter cameras, 4 motion-triggered pole units, 2 thermal ridge lenses, and 1 plate recognition gate camera tied to encrypted cloud storage. Until now, they had mostly recorded elk crossings and weather fronts. Tonight, they became evidence engines. I built a timestamp matrix across 3 nights of activity. Then I found the first critical sequence. August 14th, 11:42 p.m. Camera, East Fence Line 03, Leon Bixby and Marcia Dent are entering my property in a contractor truck. August 14th, 11:48 p.m. Camera Pole North 02. The Western Range infrastructure crew is unloading steel chain. August 14th, 11:51 p.m. Thermal Ridge Lens, Karen Voss, arrived separately in her white SUV headlights off. She had lied to the sheriff when she claimed no knowledge of the chain blockade, but there she was, present on site, supervising trespass. Then came something even better. At 12:07 a.m., Leon handed Karen an envelope. She opened it under the floodlight glare. Even through grain compression, the paper header was readable when enlarged frame by frame. Ridgeline Crest Special Board, Action Acquisition Authorization, Mercer Corridor, Unauthorized Acquisition Packet, prepared before any lawful condemnation proceeding, meaning the HOA Board had formally voted to seize my land without jurisdiction. I exported the footage into authenticated evidence format and duplicated it onto 2 encrypted drives. Then I kept searching. At 1:26 a.m. Camera Barn West captured another surprise. A pickup truck from Western Range Infrastructure is backing behind my equipment shed. 2 men exited carrying stacks of printed notices. At 1:31 a.m., they moved along my property line, posting false violation citations onto fence remnants and utility posts, fake compliance notices. Fabricated enforcement campaign designed to create documentary confusion. Classic intimidation fraud. By 2:10 a.m., my evidence board wall was covered with still frames, faces, vehicles, license plates, timestamp logs, false notices, chain installation, forgery packet exchange. And then the real break came. At 2:47 a.m., I opened archived camera footage from 6 weeks earlier, back before my fence had been touched, when Ridgeline Crest was still pretending none of this existed. There, on a June recording, near the eastern ridgeline, I found Karen meeting privately with a man I recognized instantly, Dale Renshaw, Mesa County Junior Planning Technician, a county employee. They stood beside survey stakes at dusk, exchanging rolled documents. Then Dale accepted a thick envelope from Leon Bixby. Cash. The thermal zoom was grainy, but unmistakable. Bribery. My pulse slowed instead of rising. That was always my reaction when cases turned real. Because bribery changes jurisdiction. Bribery turns civil corruption into criminal exposure. By sunrise, I had enough evidence to justify not only expanded civil claims, but also referral to state investigators. At 7:15 a.m., I called Deputy Elkins. He arrived at 8:02, carrying 2 deputies and 1 digital evidence officer. We reviewed footage in silence. When the June bribery clip ended, Elkins leaned back and rubbed his jaw. That county planner is finished. If chain of custody stays clean, I said. It will. He copied authenticated footage directly into sheriff evidence intake. Then he looked at Karen's midnight chain footage again. She's done more than trespass now. Yes, I said quietly. She's entered conspiracy territory. By mid-morning, I drove into town for the next phase. The Mesa County Records Compliance Office had partially fulfilled my FOIA requests overnight. 3 large PDF batches awaited download. Inside them, internal engineering reports, board correspondence, emergency infrastructure memos, insurance warnings, and buried in folder 6, an unsigned email thread marked Confidential from Karen Voss to Leon Bixby, Marcia Dent. Subject North Culvert Failure Messaging Excerpt. Do not disclose full structural risk until the Mercer corridor transfer is complete. If residents panic before they secure alternate access property values, collapse. I read that sentence 3 times. She had knowingly concealed a public safety risk from 214 homeowners. Not incompetence. Intentional concealment. That afternoon, I met with Helen Pike, Curtis Hale, Miguel Torres, and 8 other Ridgeline Crest residents inside the back room of an old feed supply warehouse outside town. They sat around folding tables under fluorescent light while I projected evidence clips onto a white wall. Karen at the midnight trespass. Leon is carrying forged plates. Marcia is supervising fake notice postings. Bribery exchange with county planner. No one spoke until the video ended. Then Miguel whispered, "She used our money to do this." Helen held her inflated HOA assessment invoices in shaking hands. My husband's medical fund is gone because of these fees. Curtis slammed his fist softly against the table. I'm a disabled veteran. She threatened foreclosure if I didn't pay. That was the human cost. Not fences, not roads, people. Families squeezed under fraudulent emergency levies while board members funneled money into land theft. By 4 p.m., residents had formed an emergency recall committee. By 4:45, local media had received anonymous copies of the bribery footage. By 5:10, Channel 8 aired a breaking segment, Ridgeline Crest HOA, under investigation for land fraud allegations. And by 6:02 p.m., Karen called me directly. For the first time since this began, her voice trembled. You've created chaos. No, I said. You did. You think residents will thank you when fire access gets suspended? I leaned back in my chair. That depends. Did you tell them the North Culvert failed because you diverted repair reserves? Silence. Then a click. She hung up. But Karen still had one move left. That evening, just after sunset, motion alerts lit up my phone again. 3 black SUVs approached the Eastern Ridge Gate. No HOA markings, no plates visible from the front angle. Masked contractors exited carrying concrete forms and steel rebar. I watched live thermal feed as they began measuring along the exact line where my injunction prohibited entry. They were trying to pour foundation posts overnight. If completed, they could create existing infrastructure presence before court review. A desperate legal gambit. I grabbed my truck keys called Elkins en route and drove hard across the ranch road under a rising Colorado moon. By the time I reached the ridge, floodlights were already blazing across my pasture. Concrete mixers turning, rebar stakes hammered into my land, and standing in the middle of it screaming orders over engine noise, Karen Voss herself. She turned when my headlights swept across the trench. For one long second, we stared at each other in white dust and rotating amber light. Then sheriff sirens rose from behind me, and every illegal camera frame she had created tonight would become tomorrow's courtroom firestorm. The sheriff's sirens hit the ridge like a blade through tension. Red and blue light washed over the torn pasture, flashing across rebar piles, cement bags, and the stunned faces of the masked contractors Karen had brought onto my land under cover of darkness. Deputy Elkins stepped out of the lead cruiser before the vehicles had fully stopped, one hand already resting near his holster, the other holding a copy of the court injunction. Everybody step away from the equipment. The concrete mixer engines died, one after another. The silence that followed felt enormous. Karen stood frozen beside a stack of steel forms, white dust clinging to her blazer hem hair whipped loose by mountain wind. For the first time since this began, she looked less like a ruler and more like someone caught inside her own collapsing machinery. Elkins walked straight to her. "You are in direct violation of a court restraining order." Karen lifted her chin, forcing composure. "This is emergency infrastructure stabilization." "No," I said from behind him, holding up my phone, with live timestamp feed still recording. "This is contempt." The deputies photographed every truck, every contractor ID, every marked foundation point driven into my parcel. One of the masked workers broke first and admitted they had been hired only 3 hours earlier under expedited board emergency authorization, paid in cash. That detail mattered. Cash bypasses clean ledgers, cash hides panic, and panic leaves accounting scars. By midnight, the Ridge site had been shut down, equipment impounded pending investigation, and Karen formally cited for contempt review at the upcoming injunction hearing. But while deputies processed the illegal construction site, my mind had already shifted elsewhere. The trucks, the forged plates, the fake notices, the shell contractor, the bribery footage. All of it required money, and money always leaves footprints. At 6:30 the next morning, I met with my forensic accountant. Nadia Soren had once testified in a racketeering housing fraud case I prosecuted in Denver. She now specializes in nonprofit and HOA financial abuse investigations, and when I called her the night before and said I think I've got concealed reserve diversion tied to land fraud, she canceled 2 clients and drove through the night from Aspen. We set up in my barn office under a hanging work lamp, laptops, open, coffee untouched. At 7:12 a.m., the first HOA financial disclosure batch arrived through a resident records request Miguel had quietly submitted months earlier and never fully reviewed. 6 years of Ridgeline Crest annual budgets, special assessments, reserve transfers, vendor invoices, bank reconciliation summaries. Karen had made one mistake common to corrupt administrators. She assumed no one would ever compare line items across years. By 9:05 a.m., Nadia had isolated the first anomaly. Western Range Infrastructure, the contractor tied to Karen's brother-in-law, had billed Ridgeline Crest $418,000 in emergency corridor feasibility and gate contingency engineering. There had been no engineering work, no permit filings, no county review stamps, just invoices, phantom billing. Then another. A company called High Basin Legal Compliance, LLC, received monthly retainers totaling $96,000 over 14 months. Corporate registration traced it to a mailbox suite in Phoenix, same managing agent as Western Range's Arizona shell entity. Layered laundering structure. Karen and her board were not merely misusing funds. They were siphoning HOA reserves into interconnected shell vendors disguised as infrastructure and legal expenses. Nadia rotated her screen toward me. "Look at this transfer pattern." 3 reserve withdrawals had occurred exactly 48 hours before each major fraudulent act, before forged plat filing, before drafting the emergency acquisition packet, before the midnight chain installation. Each withdrawal labeled Emergency Access Preservation Reserve, Resident Money Financing Criminal Trespass. At 10:30 a.m., Helen Pike arrived carrying something I had not expected. A banker's box filled with copied HOA board packets from the last 18 months. My late husband kept everything she said quietly. He thought Karen was hiding money. Inside were board meeting binders, handwritten annotations, budget drafts, and unsigned motion sheets. And buried in a March finance packet, a rejected motion from Treasurer Marcia Dent. Subject recommendation: to disclose culvert collapse reserve deficit to residents. Karen's handwritten note across the margin: denied. Delay until the Mercer parcel is resolved. My jaw tightened. That single sentence tied concealment of infrastructure failure directly to the land seizure conspiracy. Intent, knowledge, suppression. By noon, Nadia had built a preliminary forensic matrix showing over $1.2 million in suspicious disbursements over 18 months. Missing reserve allocations, inflated contractor bids, duplicated invoices, false legal retainers, kickback loops. Curtis Hale arrived just as Nadia printed the first fraud chart. He stared at the spreadsheets in disbelief. My mortgage went up because of her emergency levy. Miguel came behind him carrying updated resident statements. 27 homeowners had received delinquency threats in the last 60 days. 3 foreclosure notices had already been initiated. This applies to families who had paid what they believed were lawful emergency assessments. Helen sat down slowly in the corner and began to cry, not loudly, just quietly, into folded hands. Because now it was visible. This was never about roads. It was about extraction. Karen had used fear of access loss to exploit her own community. At 1:45 p.m., I transmitted the full forensic packet to 3 destinations: Mesa County Fraud Division, Colorado State HOA Oversight Commission, District Court Civil Docket Supplemental Filing. Then I added a 4th Internal Revenue Service Financial Crimes Referral Unit. Shell vendor laundering across state lines tends to interest federal agencies. At 3:10 p.m., local media exploded. The Sentinel published leaked excerpts from the reserve diversion chart under the headline, "Ridgeline Crest Board Linked to Possible $1.2 million HOA Fraud Scheme." By 4 p.m., residents surrounded the clubhouse demanding emergency disclosure. Karen refused to appear. Leon Bixby fled through a rear exit and was caught on camera trying to remove archive boxes from the records room. Marcia Dent reportedly locked herself inside her office and refused to answer police knocking. At 5:18 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Karen's voice came low and controlled, stripped now of public arrogance. "You have no idea what happens if this board falls." I leaned against my desk looking at the forensic charts spread beneath the lamp. "No," I said. "I think I do. You shut down the entrance and lenders pull financing. Insurance collapses. Residents lose everything." There it was, the final truth. Her entire fraud rested on preserving appearances long enough to avoid market collapse. She was not protecting residents. She was protecting the illusion that kept the scheme alive. "You should have fixed the culvert," I said. She inhaled sharply. "Then, you think the wall will save you wall?" I said nothing, because until that moment no public filing had yet mentioned the legal boundary wall petition I had drafted the night before, which meant only one possibility: someone inside county planning had leaked sealed court documents to her. Another corrupt contact. Another loose thread. And now I knew where to pull next. That evening, as the Colorado sky burned orange behind the ridge, and residents gathered outside the gate with recall petitions in hand, I finalized construction authorization for the next lawful move. Not revenge. Not retaliation. A court-compliant boundary wall, built entirely on my land. And once erected, it would close the only legal entrance Ridgeline Crest had left. By tomorrow morning, Karen's kingdom would face its first real barricade, and this one would be perfectly legal. At 5:40 a.m., before the sun cleared the eastern ridge, the first flatbed truck rolled onto my land, carrying reinforced precast concrete panels. The wall had begun. Colorado mornings in late August can feel deceptive cool blue air still wind the illusion of peace before heat and conflict rise. That morning, the silence over my ranch felt like the pause before a courthouse verdict. I stood beside the survey stakes Elena Ruiz had reset at dawn, each fluorescent marker placed exactly along the lawful boundary edge of my parcel. Not 1 inch crossed into Ridgeline Crest property. That precision mattered. Because what I was building had to survive more than outrage. It had to survive court. The night before, District Court Judge Miriam Holtz had signed my supplemental boundary enforcement authorization pending adjudication of easement breach. I was legally entitled to erect a non-permanent, removable access barrier on my deeded strip, provided emergency responder clearance protocols remained preserved under sheriff-monitored override. In simpler terms, I could block the HOA's only lawful entrance, and I was doing it by the book. At 6:15 a.m., High Mesa Barrier Systems began unloading the first vertical slabs. Each panel measured 12 feet wide, 10 feet high, anchored into removable steel footings instead of permanent foundations, to remain compliant with injunction limits. The engineering plan included a coded emergency swing gate, accessible only to county fire and ambulance responders. Karen would not be able to claim public endangerment. I had closed every legal loophole before sunrise. By 6:40, the first residents of Ridgeline Crest began arriving at the entrance road in stunned silence. Luxury SUVs lined up behind the stone gate and stopped one after another as they saw cranes lifting concrete into place directly beyond the ornamental pillars. The visual effect was brutal. Behind their polished decorative entrance arch, a gray legal wall was rising like judgment itself. Curtis Hale was among the first residents to approach me on foot. He stared up at the slab's arms, folded tightly across his chest. "Can she stop this?" "No," I said. He nodded once. Then quietly, "She told us you were bluffing." By 7:30, local media vans had returned. Mesa Ridge Sentinel, Channel 8 News. Even Denver Regional Legal Affairs Press. A helicopter drone from one station circled overhead, filming the extraordinary image. A gated luxury subdivision watching its only lawful entrance disappear behind a lawful property barrier erected by the landowner they had tried to cheat. By 8:05 a.m., Karen arrived. She came fast white, SUV fishtailing gravel brakes, spitting dust, as she slammed to a stop beside the half-finished wall. She stepped out before the engine fully died. For a moment, she simply stared. The wall had already reached 30 feet across, 5 concrete spans in place. Her face lost all remaining color. "You cannot do this." I turned from the survey line clipboard and met her gaze evenly. "I already am. This is obstruction of emergency infrastructure." I handed her a laminated copy of the court authorization. She didn't take it. Deputy Elkins, standing nearby with 2 patrol vehicles and sheriff's supervision detail, stepped closer and said calmly, "The construction is court-approved. Any interference becomes criminal obstruction." Karen's mouth opened, closed. Then she turned on the camera crews. "This man is holding an entire neighborhood hostage," a reporter shouted back. "Did your board forge plats to seize his land?" Another, "Did Ridgeline Crest conceal reserve fraud from residents?" Karen spun away without answering, and that was when the residents turned. It started with Helen Pike. 72 years old, silver-haired, shoulders trembling but voice sharp as cut wire. She stepped out from the gathered crowd and held up her stack of emergency levy invoices. "You took my husband's cancer savings." Then Miguel Torres shouted, "You threatened foreclosure on my family." Then more voices, a rising wave. Residents flooding out from stalled vehicles and sidewalks, confronting Karen in front of cameras, deputies, and the unfinished wall. Leon Bixby never appeared. Marcia Dent sent an email resignation at 8:22 a.m., while the confrontation unfolded live on local television. By 9 o'clock, the wall reached full span across the easement corridor. 72 feet of reinforced removable barrier. Only the coded emergency gate remained inset at center. Ridgeline Crest's stone arch now opened onto a concrete closure. Symbolically devastating. Legally airtight. At 9:14 a.m., David Laramie HOA counsel arrived in a black sedan carrying a briefcase and visible panic. He requested private negotiation. I refused private discussion and directed him to speak in the presence of deputies and the press. He lowered his voice anyway. "The board is willing to rescind all fines and compensate fence damages. That offer expired when they poured concrete on my land, under injunction." He wiped sweat from his brow. "If access remains closed through next week, lenders may freeze, pending closings. That is not my fraud to repair." He looked toward Karen, now trapped in an argument with furious residents. Then he said the words I had expected. She acted without full board disclosure. There it was. The first fracture in their legal defense. Counsel was beginning to isolate Karen personally. At 10:30 a.m., county fire marshal inspectors arrived to verify emergency access compliance. They tested override gate controls, confirmed emergency vehicle clearance width, approved sheriff override lockbox. Karen lost her public safety argument in under 14 minutes. By noon, the recall committee delivered signed petitions representing 61% of Ridgeline Crest homeowners well above the bylaw's threshold for an emergency board suspension vote. Curtis Hale handed the petition box directly to Deputy Elkins for chain of custody transfer. Karen watched that happen, and something inside her seemed to collapse. For the first time, she stopped shouting, stopped commanding, stopped performing power. She just stood there in front of the wall, staring at the concrete barrier where her subdivision's authority used to begin. At 1:45 p.m., my phone buzzed with an alert from Nadia Soren. Subject line, urgent, new ledger dump. Attached was a newly leaked internal transfer sheet from Ridgeline Crest accounts. One entry highlighted in red wire transfer $180,000, recipient D. Renshaw, consulting escrow, Dale Renshaw. The county planning technician caught my bribery footage. Karen had paid him through HOA funds. Public corruption, bribery, misappropriation, wire fraud indicators. The wall had done more than block a road. It had forced the hidden money into the light. At 3 p.m., state investigators arrived unannounced at the Ridgeline Crest clubhouse with document seizure warrants. By 3:22, bankers froze 2 HOA reserve accounts pending fraud review. By 4:10, Leon Bixby's attorney informed county investigators his client was seeking cooperation and immunity. And at sunset, when the last construction crane pulled off my ranch and the finished wall cast its long shadow across the closed entrance lane, Karen Voss remained standing alone beside her silent white SUV. No board, no residents, no allies. Just her reflection in the cold gray concrete she had created by trying to steal what was never hers. And as the evening wind moved down from the ridge, carrying dust through the broken remains of the gate road beyond, I understood something with perfect clarity. The wall was never the punishment. The truth behind it was. The morning after the wall went up, Ridgeline Crest looked like a neighborhood under siege by its own lies. From the ridge above my ranch, I could see the queue before sunrise SUVs, backed down the curved interior lane, brake lights glowing red in the blue dawn like a string of stalled embers. Delivery trucks sat idling outside the stone arch. Contractors turned around at the barricade. A landscaping van reversed into a decorative hedge, trying to maneuver out of the deadlock. No one had expected the wall to hold. That was Karen's final strategic miscalculation. She had built her authority on one assumption that courts move slowly, residents stay passive, and pressure always breaks the quieter party first. But the wall was lawful. The injunction was active. The easement breach was real. And now, the panic belonged to her. At 7:05 a.m., I received the first emergency dispatch complaint, not from the sheriff, from Ridgeline Crest residents. A child with an asthma attack in the southern cul-de-sac needed paramedics. The subdivision's private panic had reached public consequence. Fortunately, the emergency override system worked exactly as designed. Deputy Elkins and County EMS arrived within minutes, unlocked the central coded gate inset into my barrier, and passed through without delay. The ambulance entered, treated the child, and exited in under 20 minutes. 3 local reporters captured the entire sequence. By 8 a.m., Karen's narrative that I had endangered public safety was dead. The footage aired live before noon. Emergency access functions normally through court-approved wall, HOA safety claims questioned. That headline detonated inside Ridgeline Crest. At 8:45 a.m., residents began gathering outside the clubhouse for the recall vote. Under the bylaws, once 60% of property owners signed a verified petition, the board was legally obligated to convene an emergency removal session within 24 hours. Karen had refused, so residents invoked the backup clause, member-supervised assembly, perfectly valid. Curtis Hale chaired the recall session beneath the covered portico outside the clubhouse because no one trusted the board to open the main hall. Honestly. Folding chairs spread across the courtyard lawn. Printed ballots stacked on card tables. Local deputies present to preserve order. I did not attend as speaker. I attended as witness. That mattered. Because this phase no longer belonged to me. This was the community reclaiming itself. Helen Pike rose first during public testimony. Her hands shook as she unfolded a handwritten page. My husband died in March, she said, voice cracking in the microphone windscreen. The emergency levy Karen imposed took the money we had set aside for his final treatment travel. Silence spread over the crowd. Then Miguel Torres stepped forward carrying foreclosure letters. They threatened my family with lien action over fraudulent assessments tied to stolen land. A murmur rose through the assembly. Then came the shock no one expected. At 9:17 a.m., Marcia Dent arrived. Former treasurer, resigned yesterday, face pale, eyes hollow. She carried 2 banker boxes. Inside them, original ledgers, unsigned board minutes, check authorization slips, wire transfer approvals. She placed both boxes on the evidence table and said into the microphone Karen ordered me to hide reserve deficits and falsify legal expense classifications. Gasps rippled across the residence. Karen, standing at the clubhouse steps in a cream coat and dark sunglasses, shouted, "You are under attorney privilege restriction." Marcia turned toward her and replied, "Not for fraud." That single sentence shattered what remained of Karen's control. At 9:30 a.m., the vote began. Paper ballots only. Name verification against deed rolls. Deputy chain of custody collection. While residents cast ballots, I remained near the outer perimeter, reviewing new messages from Nadia Soren. She had spent the night tracing additional banking transfers from the seized HOA reserve accounts. 3 newly identified wires had surfaced. One to Dale Renshaw's Consulting Escrow, one to Western Range Infrastructure, and one to a previously unknown recipient, Stone Mesa Holdings, LLC. That name triggered memory. I searched Colorado corporate records on my phone. Stone Mesa Holdings owned the parcel adjacent to the condemned North Culvert site, the exact parcel Karen had proposed as future alternate emergency corridor redevelopment. Its registered beneficiary, Karen Voss. She had secretly acquired neighboring land personally while using HOA funds to create the access crisis, meaning the entire land theft scheme had an endgame: destroy the original entrance. Force acquisition of my land. If that failed, push HOA funded rerouting onto her private adjacent parcel and profit from resale easements. Self-enrichment through manufactured infrastructure collapse. Not incompetence, not desperation, design. At 10:42 a.m., Channel 8 interrupted regular programming with a live field report from outside Ridgeline Crest. The anchor introduced newly leaked bribery footage involving County Planner Dale Renshaw. Then they aired the June thermal clip, Karen, Leon, Renshaw, envelope exchange, publicly, in full. The crowd outside the clubhouse saw it on phones in real time. Chaos followed, residents shouting. Board members' names screamed aloud. One man tore his own HOA parking permit decal off his windshield and threw it at the clubhouse wall. Deputies moved closer as tempers flared. Karen tried to leave, but reporters boxed her SUV in before she could reverse. Did you bribe county officials? Did you conceal the culvert collapse? Did you use reserve funds for personal land acquisition? She gave no answer. At 11:15 a.m., Curtis announced recall results. Total verified ballots, 187. Votes for removal, 173. Karen Voss and Leon Bixby were removed immediately from office. Remaining board authority suspended pending state oversight appointment. For one long moment, no one moved. Then applause broke like storm rain. Not triumphant, not joyful, relieved. The kind of applause people give when a long fever finally breaks. Karen stood motionless on the clubhouse steps as the numbers were read aloud again for record confirmation. Removed, stripped of authority in front of the community she had ruled through fear. She turned then finally toward me, across the crowd, across the courtyard, across the wreckage she had built. And in her face, I saw something colder than rage, calculation. Because even now, even after exposure, even after recall, Karen was still protecting something. At 12:08 p.m., that something surfaced. Deputy Elkins received a direct call from Mesa County Fraud Division. Then he crossed the courtyard fast toward me, expression hard. State investigators just opened the seized clubhouse archive room, he said quietly. What did they find? He held my gaze. Boxes of shredded financial records. I felt the old prosecutorial instinct flare again. Destruction of evidence after notice of investigation. Felony territory. Who had access? Elkins lowered his voice. Karen entered the clubhouse alone at 5:40 this morning. Security footage confirms it. She had tried to burn the ledger trail before the vote, but she had moved too late because Marcia Dent had already brought the originals. By 100 p.m., state fraud agents sealed the clubhouse. By 1:25, Karen's personal office was entered under emergency preservation order. By 2 o'clock, a criminal subpoena request for her private banking records was filed. And then, just before sunset, the final blow of the day arrived. A process server approached Karen beside her SUV and handed her a thick envelope in full view of gathered residents and cameras. Civil fraud complaint, personal liability naming, asset freeze petition notice. She opened the first page, read 2 lines, and for the first time since I met her, Karen Voss visibly trembled. The gate had become a wall. The wall had become a vote. And now the vote had become a collapse. No board privilege could stop. But as darkness settled over Ridgeline Crest and deputies locked the clubhouse doors behind evidence tape, I knew the hardest battle still lay ahead. Because tomorrow in district court, the forged plats would finally meet sworn testimony, and under oath lies have nowhere left to stand. The courthouse in Mesa Ridge sits on a rise above the old railroad line, a sandstone building with narrow windows that catch morning light like watchful eyes. I arrived before dawn, long before the public gallery filled, carrying 2 leather cases and a sealed evidence binder marked for judicial review. By then, the Ridgeline Crest matter had outgrown any label resembling HOA dispute. What began as a broken fence had become a multi-agency corruption case involving land fraud, forged public filings, bribery, concealed infrastructure, failure, reserve theft, evidence destruction, and possible wire laundering across state lines. And now, it was entering the one arena Karen Voss could no longer dominate with staged authority, sworn court record. At 7:10 a.m., I stood alone in the courthouse annex conference room reviewing witness sequence with Nadia Soren Elena Ruiz, Deputy Ellens, and Assistant County Fraud Counsel Dana Mireles. Dana had joined the case formally after state investigators linked the bribery footage to county planning employee Dale Renshaw, who had been suspended overnight and placed under criminal inquiry. Renshaw's attorney is talking cooperation, Dana said, opening her folder. If he flips, Karen's conspiracy exposure widens. She'll try to isolate blame onto Leon, I said. Dana nodded. Which is why your testimony matters first. Because I was not merely plaintiff now. I was pattern witness. And that was where my hidden advantage finally became public. At 8 a.m., courtroom doors opened. Every seat filled. Residents, reporters, county officials, 3 state fraud investigators, even regional housing compliance observers from Denver. Karen entered at 8:11, flanked by her counsel, David Laramie, and a newly retained criminal defense attorney from Boulder. She wore charcoal gray instead of her usual bright authority colors. No pearls, no smile. Just fatigue sharpened into tension. Judge Miriam Holtz took the bench at 8:30 precisely. The first matter, called Mercer v. Ridgeline Crest, HOA, consolidated with fraud referral findings. Dana rose first. Then, after opening procedural statements, she called me. I took the witness stand and swore in. For a moment, the courtroom became very quiet. Then Dana asked Mr. Mercer, "Would you state your professional background for the record?" And there it was. The revelation Karen had never fully understood. I am a former assistant state prosecutor for Colorado, I said, voice steady, specializing in fraudulent corruption and public bribery cases for 11 years. A visible ripple moved through the gallery. Karen's face changed. Not dramatically, but enough, because in that instant, she understood something she should have grasped from the beginning. She had not been fighting an angry rancher defending a fence. She had been constructing fraud in front of a man professionally trained to dismantle fraud structures. Dana guided me through chronology. Fence destruction, forged plat inconsistencies, survey confirmation, trespass footage, midnight chain installation, illegal nighttime concrete attempt, easement breach clause activation, wall authorization. Then came the key pivot. Dana displayed the enlarged forged plat on courtroom monitors. Mr. Mercer, how did you first identify this document as suspicious? The filing suffix code was impossible, I said. It matched drainage amendment indexing, not easement reassignment categories. That inconsistency is common in altered municipal fraud filings. Karen's attorney objected. Judge Holtz overruled. The evidence continued. Then Elena Ruiz testified. She walked the court through boundary overlays with mathematical precision, proving the excavation trench crossed 12 feet into my deeded land and that the revised plat had been digitally manipulated using cloned county seal assets. Then Deputy Elkins entered evidence from the midnight trespass recordings. The courtroom monitors played the footage. Leon, Marcia, Karen, chain installation, false notices, and then the June bribery clip. Karen standing beside Dale Renshaw. Envelope exchange. Cash visible. For the first time all morning, Karen looked away from the screen. By 10:55 a.m., Dana called Nadia Soren. Her forensic testimony landed like artillery. She projected reserve diversion charts showing $418,000 phantom contractor billing, $96,000 Shell legal retainers, $180,000 wire to Renshaw escrow, hidden transfer to Stone Mesa Holdings. Dana asked, "Who controls Stone Mesa Holdings?" Nadia answered, "Karen Voss is beneficial owner." An audible gasp swept the gallery. Then Dana delivered the trap question. What was Stone Mesa Holdings positioned to gain if Ridgeline Crest lost original entrance access? Nadia clicked to parcel map overlay. It owned adjacent reroute land, proposed for emergency replacement easement purchase. Meaning Karen had engineered profit from infrastructure collapse, she concealed. Self-dealing proven in open court. Karen's counsel immediately requested recess, denied. At 11:20 a.m., Dana called Marcia Dent. Marcia walked in pale, visibly trembling, carrying her immunity agreement copy. Under oath, she testified Karen ordered reserve concealment. Karen instructed false expense reclassification. Karen approved forged plat submission. Karen directed destruction of records before recall vote. Then came the final blow. Dana asked, "Did the board lawfully approve Mercer land acquisition?" Marcia swallowed hard. No. Was there ever legal condemnation authority? No. Then why was acquisition paperwork drafted? Marcia looked directly at Karen. Because Karen said, if Mercer resisted, we'd create paperwork that forced him into court after construction made reversal impossible. Premeditated, coercive fraud. The judge wrote notes for nearly 30 uninterrupted seconds. At noon, Karen finally took the stand in her own defense, against her attorney's visible discomfort. That decision destroyed her. At first, she remained composed. She claimed emergency necessity, board misunderstanding, reliance on bad contractor advice. Then Dana approached for cross-examination, and Dana knew exactly where to cut. Ms. Voss. She said, "Did you personally own Stone Mesa Holdings while negotiating alternate access solutions for the HOA?" Karen hesitated. "Yes, but did you disclose that ownership to residents? Number, did you disclose it to the board?" Silence. Judge Holtz looked up sharply. Karen tried. "It wasn't finalized," Dana interrupted. "Did you disclose it?" "No." Then Dana placed the June bribery still image on the screen. "Did you provide money to Dale Renshaw?" Karen froze. Her attorney objected again. Overruled. Karen's breathing visibly changed. It was consulting compensation. Dana stepped closer. In cash, in a parking field without invoice record, Karen said nothing. And silence in court can be louder than confession. By 1:05 p.m., Judge Holtz issued interim bench findings. Probable fraud established. Trespass confirmed. Forgery evidence credible. Fiduciary breach supported. Emergency forensic audit ordered. Immediate freeze on remaining HOA reserve assets granted. Then she added words that changed the case permanently. This court refers evidence of coordinated fraudulent conduct for criminal conspiracy review. Criminal conspiracy, not just civil liability now, criminal exposure. As deputies escorted Karen from the witness stand, reporters rushed from the gallery to file breaking alerts. Residents outside the courthouse erupted when the ruling reached them. But I remained seated a moment longer, watching Karen at counsel table. For months, She had weaponized signature seals and false authority. Now she sat stripped of all procedural armor. And yet one question still haunted me. Because Dana leaned over just before adjournment and whispered, "Renshaw flipped this morning." I turned toward her. "What did he give you?" Dana slid one sealed envelope across council rail. Inside was a subpoena summary. Additional named recipients in the bribery chain. One of them was not Leon, not Marcia, not Karen. It was a sitting county commissioner, which meant the corruption above Ridgeline Crest ran higher than any of us had yet seen. And the next hearing would not just threaten an HOA board. It would threaten county government itself. The second hearing began under storm clouds. By dawn, a slate-gray front had rolled over Mesa Ridge from the western mountains, pressing low over the courthouse square like weather itself had come to witness the collapse. Rain struck the sandstone windows in hard, diagonal sheets, as reporters crowded beneath awnings and satellite vans lined the curb in a row of humming generators. By then, Ridgeline Crest was no longer the lead story on local news. It had become a statewide scandal. Colorado HOA fraud case expands into county corruption probe. That headline ran across every major station before sunrise, and inside Courtroom 2, the consequences were about to become irreversible. At 8:20 a.m., I entered to find the gallery already overflowing, residents packed, shoulder-to-shoulder legal observers standing in rear aisles, state investigators occupying the left bench, and a federal financial crimes liaison seated quietly behind Dana Morales. Karen Voss arrived under escort, not handcuffed, not yet. But escorted, gone, was the polished composure that once carried her through board meetings like royalty. Her hair was unstyled, pulled back loosely. Her gray suit wrinkled at the sleeves. Leon Bixby, by contrast, did not appear at all. At 8:32, Dana handed me a copy of the sealed supplement Renshaw had unlocked overnight. His cooperation statement had detonated the case. The sitting county commissioner, named in the bribery chain Commissioner Hal Brenner, had allegedly approved expedited land filing bypasses in exchange for political donation laundering routed through shell infrastructure contractors, including Western Range Infrastructure and Stone Mesa Holdings. Karen's scheme had never been isolated. Ridgeline Crest had been one branch of a larger corruption lattice. At 8:45, Judge Holtz entered and called the court to order. Dana rose immediately. The state moves to admit cooperating witness deposition from Dale Renshaw and emergency subpoena returns from the Mesa County Planning Commission. The defense objected. Denied. Then the projector screens lit up. Bank wire charts, communication logs, approval memos. One email from Commissioner Brenner to Karen Voss left everyone in the room stunned. Push the Mercer parcel before court scrutiny. If the entrance fails, we lose the redevelopment corridor vote. That sentence tied public office directly to a private land theft conspiracy. Karen stared at the screen as though she had never seen the message before. Perhaps she had not realized Renshaw preserved copies. Corrupt systems often fail because one frightened accomplice saves everything. At 9:10 a.m., Leon Bixby entered unexpectedly under separate escort. He had cut a plea cooperation deal overnight. His attorney announced it before he even sat down. Leon testified first, voice shaking, hands trembling. He confirmed Karen directed the forged plat submission. Karen ordered fake violation notices. Karen approved record shredding. Commissioner Brenner pressured accelerated corridor seizure before county audit exposure. Then Dana asked the question that made the courtroom inhale as one body. Did Karen Voss personally profit from the emergency access crisis? Leon closed his eyes before answering. Yes. How much projected resale easement valuation was over $2.4 million. A sound escaped the gallery, not speech, not a gasp, something closer to collective betrayal. Because every resident in that room understood what that number meant. Their inflated dues, their foreclosure threats, their drained retirement funds, all financing Karen's private land windfall. At 10:05 a.m., federal financial liaison Mark Ellison took the stand. He confirmed interstate shell routing patterns through Arizona and Wyoming vendor accounts, potential wire fraud, tax concealment, multi-state laundering indicators. That shifted the room again. The case had crossed federal thresholds. Karen's criminal defense attorney requested adjournment for jurisdiction reassessment. Judge Holtz refused. Fraud does not pause for comfort counsel. At 10:40 a.m., the court turned to remedies. Dana requested permanent dissolution of current Ridgeline Crest Board authority, court-appointed receivership over HOA governance, asset freeze expansion, forensic audit mandate covering 6 fiscal years, personal liability attachment against Karen Voss and named co-conspirators. Then she requested one more thing: referral for criminal charging conference within 72 hours. Karen stood abruptly before her attorney could stop her. "This is political theater." Judge Holtz's gaze cut across the bench. "Sit down, Ms. Voss." Karen did not. Instead, she turned toward the residence gallery. "They would have lost everything without me. I was saving property values." Helen Pike rose from the second row, voice raw with grief. "My husband died believing we were bankrupt because of your lies." No one moved. No one interrupted. Karen slowly sat back down. And in that silence, whatever remained of her public legitimacy died. At 11:25 a.m., Judge Holtz delivered findings. Each sentence landed like stone. The forged plats were judicially voided. The attempt to seize the Mercer corridor was declared fraudulent and unlawful. All false fines and emergency assessments issued under the corrupt board were invalidated immediately. Pending foreclosure actions against residents were permanently barred. Then came the order that made headlines before the gavel even struck. The Ridgeline Crest HOA Board is hereby dissolved in its present form. Dissolved, not suspended, not restructured, destroyed as governing authority. A court-appointed receiver would manage community operations until democratic reconstitution. Then Holtz granted my petition regarding easement rights. The wall would remain in place until lawful community governance certified new access compliance and remediation obligations. The barrier had become a court-sanctioned legal boundary, permanent until reform. At noon, deputies moved toward Karen, this time with handcuffs. Her attorney protested. Dana handed over the signed criminal detention authorization. Charges pending filing: fraudulent scheme, forgery, evidence tampering, conspiracy to commit bribery, misappropriation of fiduciary funds. Karen looked toward me once, as deputies secured her wrists. There was no rage left in her expression now, only disbelief. It was as though she still could not understand how a system she had manipulated so completely had turned against her and judged her. Outside, rain hammered the courthouse steps as reporters surged forward. But the day was not over. At 1:15 p.m., state investigators raided Commissioner Brenner's office, live on local television. By 2 p.m., his resignation was announced. By 3:10 p.m., Ridgeline Crest Reserve accounts, what remained after freezes, were placed under judicial protection for resident restitution. And at 4:30 p.m., Nadia called me with numbers from the first emergency audit summary. Recovered traceable assets, $863,000. Enough to begin refunding residents. Enough to halt the worst financial damage. Enough to start repair. That evening, after the courthouse emptied and stormwater ran in silver ribbons down the curbside gutters, I drove back to the wall. Residents had gathered there quietly. No chants, no celebration. Just candles. Helen, Curtis, Miguel. Families who had feared losing homes. Someone had placed flowers at the base of the concrete barrier. Not because the wall was beautiful, because it had become the line where the lies stopped. Curtis stood beside me under a black umbrella and said softly, "So what happens now?" I looked at the closed gate beyond the rain, at the subdivision lights glowing behind it. No longer symbols of exclusion, but of a community forced to rebuild honestly. Now, I said, they build something legal. But even as I said it, I knew the final chapter was still unfinished. Because justice in court is one thing. Healing a divided neighborhood is another. And tomorrow, for the first time since this war began, the people of Ridgeline Crest would have to decide whether they still wanted to be a community at all. The first morning after Karen Voss was taken into custody, the wall stood in silence beneath a clear Colorado sky. No news vans, No deputies. No shouting residents clutching petitions. Just sunlight sliding across the concrete panels in long gold bands, and the low mountain wind moving through the cottonwoods beyond the eastern ridge like a breath finally released. For the first time in weeks, Ridgeline Crest was quiet. Not peaceful. Not yet. But quiet in the way a battlefield becomes quiet after the guns stop, when people begin to realize they are still standing and now must decide what comes next. I arrived at the gate just after dawn carrying coffee in a steel thermos and a folded county receivership notice under my arm. Curtis Hale was already there, leaning against the stone entrance pillar. He looked older than he had a month ago. We all did. "Receivers opening the first assembly at 9, he said. I nodded. Behind the wall, residents were gathering in clusters near the clubhouse lawn. No polished board banners. No HOA insignia signs. The Ridgeline crest plaques, had been removed overnight under court order. Their absence changed the landscape more than I expected. Without Karen's branding everywhere, the neighborhood looked less like an institution and more like what it had always truly been: families, homes, people who had been made to fear one another. At 9 sharp, court-appointed receiver Angela Marin convened the first lawful community assembly under temporary judicial governance. Angela was a former municipal ethics auditor from Denver, precise, unsentimental, impossible to charm. She opened with facts. Recovered reserve funds, $863,000. Frozen pending restitution review, additional $417,000. Active criminal restitution claims against Karen Leon and named co-conspirators. Insurance reinstatement negotiations underway. Foreclosure actions canceled in full. When she announced that every fraudulent emergency levy would be refunded proportionally through supervised reimbursement, the room broke into tears before applause. Helen Pike covered her mouth and wept openly. Miguel bowed his head into both hands. Curtis simply stared at the floor, breathing hard, as though his body no longer trusted relief. Then Angela reached the matter everyone feared most. "The north culvert is structurally beyond repair," she said. A hush fell over the hall. She turned to the engineering projection screen. "The subdivision requires a new permanent lawful entrance route." And there it was. The question behind every lawsuit, every hearing, every lie. Access. All eyes shifted toward me, because the Mercer corridor, the land beneath the wall, remained the only code-compliant entrance path. Angela met my gaze directly. "Mr. Mercer, have you reached a decision regarding future easement negotiations?" I stood slowly. For weeks, I had imagined this moment in different forms. Revenge versions, punishment versions. Versions where I left the wall standing forever. But standing there, in front of the families who had also been victims, I understood something Karen never had. Land can divide people, or it can become the place where repair begins. Yes, I said. And then I unfolded the document in my hand. A new easement proposal. Permanent conditional access deed. Not to the dissolved HOA board. Not to any private developer. But to a newly restructured resident-owned community trust governed by transparent bylaws, public audit requirements, annual forensic accounting reviews, and statutory anti-corruption clauses enforceable by county oversight. No private board president powers. No concealed reserve transfers. No unilateral special levies. Every major financial action would require a recorded resident vote and independent review. Angela read the terms in silence, then looked up. "This is unusually protective." "It needs to be," I said. "Because justice is not complete when corruption falls. Justice is complete when the structure that allowed corruption cannot grow back." The vote to accept the new easement trust passed almost unanimously. 187 in favor, 4 abstentions, none opposed, and with that, the wall had served its final legal purpose. 3 days later, demolition crews returned, not to tear down a stolen fence this time, but to remove the barrier that had stopped a fraud machine. Residents gathered as each concrete panel was lifted free. Children watched from sidewalks. Elderly couples stood hand in hand. Reporters filmed quietly from the edges, but no one tried to sensationalize it. The wall had become something sacred in its own way, a scar that proved survival. At noon, when the last panel rose into the crane harness, sunlight flooded through the reopened entrance lane for the first time in weeks. Beyond the stone arch, the road lay open. Not Karen's road, not the board's road, the community's road. Curtis stepped beside me as the final slab cleared the ground. You could have kept it closed forever. Yes, I said. Why didn't you? I looked toward Helen Miguel and the families standing in that sunlight. Because they're not her. That afternoon, Angela oversaw installation of a bronze plaque at the former wall foundation line. It read, "Boundary of Lawful Resistance." On this ground, abuse of power was stopped by truth evidence and community courage. Residents added flowers around its base before sunset. In the weeks that followed, the criminal cases widened. Commissioner Hal Brenner was indicted on bribery and conspiracy charges. Dale Renshaw entered a formal plea of cooperation. Leon Bixby accepted reduced sentencing in exchange for full financial disclosures. Karen Voss denied bail pending a fraud trial, faced combined state and federal charges carrying decades of exposure. Her lawyers tried 3 times to suppress the bribery footage. They failed every time. And Ridgeline Crest began to heal. Not dramatically. Healing never looks dramatic from inside. It looked like Helen reopening the community garden Karen had sold off on paper, but never legally transferred. It looked like Miguel coaching neighborhood kids on the clubhouse field after receivership reopened shared spaces. It looked like Curtis helping rebuild the Financial Oversight Committee with veterans and retired teachers instead of loyalists and silent board allies. And it looked like something else too. Policy change. 6 months after the ruling, Mesa County passed the Mercer Transparency Ordinance. Mandatory independent forensic audits for all HOAs over 50 homes. Public disclosure of related party contracts. Criminal penalties for forged plat submissions tied to private associations. The ordinance spread quickly. By the next legislative cycle, 3 neighboring counties adopted parallel statutes. What Karen built through secrecy collapsed. What the community rebuilt through accountability began to spread. Late that autumn, on the anniversary of the fence destruction, I walked alone to the bronze plaque at dusk. The reopened road beyond it glowed under amber subdivision lamps. Cars passed peacefully through the entrance. No guards, no fake notices, no fear. Just neighbors coming home. I rested one hand on the bronze edge and thought about how close so many families had come to losing everything because they trusted signatures without transparency, authority without scrutiny, and boards without oversight. That is how abuse survives. In silence, in paperwork, no one reads, in fear that no one will fight back. So if there is anything this story leaves behind, let it be this document, everything. Question authority, protect your records, stand together before fear isolates you. Because the strongest wall is never concrete, it is a community that refuses to be divided by lies.